Hello all, I've officially returned from my hiatus, and I figured what better way than to start by introducing what my method actually is, because I think my first video has, well, from the feedback I've received, it's quite evidently the case that I haven't explained my method adequately, so I'm going to do that now. And the most important thing for that, yes, welcome to the wide, wacky world of symbols. It really is like that. The most important thing to start with is the definition of the word symbol, because I see it being sort of homologized to the term metaphor, which that's wrong. Don't do that. So the Greek term, or at least the root that I'm using here is symbolo, which means to throw together, correspond, to come to a conclusion. Those three things are absolutely key to the way that I treat these symbols. So what is a symbol? Well, a symbol consists of a fact that is combined with a meaning or its meaning, and the symbol, which is the token of that meaning, has something in common with the aspect of reality that it refers to, which as a concept is highly abstract and very difficult to express, which is why we use symbols. They're much more intuitive than words in a sense. So seeing as it's about corresponding fact and meaning, symbols are in fact meant to indicate relationships. So what that means is that the symbol, the meaning of the symbol and the story arises from its relation to what it points at within the context of other symbols, and it's placed within that context and sequence, which is very abstract. You might need a symbol for that, but like I said, it's not the same thing as a metaphor or an allegory, which would be an attempt to use a different term to describe something that is essentially on the same plane of abstraction, if you will, though people do use symbols for that. We're going to look at that. So an example of lateral symbology, as you could call it, as in on the same plane, so you're interpreting sideways, as it were. An example of that would be political cartoons, because the intention for as far as the use of symbols go in those seems very arbitrary, but at the same time, it can't help but tap into true symbolism. So we're going to look at an example here. Yes, never mind the whole politics thing, it's just, this is a good example, okay? So the message is it's put forward quite plainly. The clothing of Icarus, it literally says Greece. His wings are actual credit cards. How bold can you get? But the thing is, it taps into something much deeper, and I don't just mean the beautiful literary heritage of the Greeks, though that certainly has a lot to do with it, as we shall soon discover. The debt crisis of Greece did not involve a single person getting anywhere near the sun, let's point that out first, and credit cards were no direct causal agents either, nor did they in fact melt. It is a reference to the story of Icarus. And the basics of those stories, if you don't know it, are that Icarus is a human being who has the limitation of not being able to fly, but receiving a pair of artificial wings by his father Daedalus, who is an inventor. He is able to fly and overcome that limitation. He then forgets that he ever had that limitation to begin with, and that he owes his new powers to something that is made by a limited being, a being that can't fly. Humans can't fly, and in his naivete and pride, he actually ends up destroying himself by pretending, as it were, that he can fly all by himself, as if he were a bird, and that's an important part. So the symbolism then is that, yes. All right, so we have high and low, heaven and earth, the mortal, the profane, as opposed to the sacred or even the divine. So we talk about feeling down or cheering up. We use high in the language to indicate a kind of superior value. And value is really important in all of this because symbols have bearing. They're describing the world in terms of the qualitative features of things. And, you know, the earth is where we live and the heavens are this vast expanse and that has its phenomenological meaning, which is to say, when you encounter it, when you're not thinking science, when you look at the sky, you might have certain feelings. You might feel that, we're completely insignificant, and that nothing means anything, or you might get the feeling that it's showing you something that points at something or someone that makes everything mean a lot. But you don't get to have that by itself if you're, I don't know, trying to look at the ozone layer or whatever. It's phenomenological. So, okay, high and low. The earth is where we live, the heavens are its vast expanse, and the sun is, in a sense, the most intense, the most defining feature of the heavens, especially within the pagan context of the Icarus story, of course. But, okay, we call smart people bright. We talk about the Enlightenment. Our mind works like our vision. We find patterns in reality, and we also see them. This is the theory of J.J. Gibson with his an ecological approach to visual perception, where he essentially argues that vision constitutes a kind of arrangement of these rebounding rays of light that then have this they take on, well, how to say this, they take on the shape to our vision, because you have these rebounding patterns or arrangements, these nested hierarchies of angles, and light rebounds off of that at certain angles and according to certain boundaries of the object itself, and at certain wavelengths, and on the basis of these things we see shape, we see color, and when the arrangement of these rebounding light rays change, we see movement and so on, and depending on those movements and those arrays, he calls them optic arrays or something like that, we can see what the object affords us. So we see the meaning of the thing. We don't have to infer, we see it directly. It's a very interesting book. So symbols are also patterns. They're a very intuitive and holistic way for us to understand the world, which is so extremely complex in some ways. But anyway, the symbolism. So we have heaven and earth. Then we have wings / flight, which is in a sense mediation between heaven and earth. And the wings are, of course, a defining trait of creatures that belong to this category of heaven. Birds fly. They're higher than us. They're closer to the sun than we are. And we don't have wings, which means that we occupy a certain place on this hierarchy, if you will, from earth to heaven. So what do? We make wings out of wax and feathers, or steel maybe, which are dead things. Feathers might have belonged to a living bird, and then they have that meaning, but when we use them to create these dead objects, they take on a kind of different meaning. So dead wings are not the same as wings attached to a bird. They're wings, but they're not alive, they're not natural. They don't partake in the quality of the living animal that they're supposed to be with. They're artificial, they're dead. And when you pretend that they don't, you'll suffer the consequences. See, Icarus, he falls into the ocean, the water, the sea, which was treated by the ancients in their myths and poetry as a primordial and destructive force. So falling into the ocean it's like going below the earth. It's being swallowed up by darkness. And this is literally what their cosmology was like, because you have to imagine, you have the earth, and then you have Tartarus, which is Tartarus, I don't know how you pronounce it exactly, which is below the earth. But what separates in a earth is the river Styx. So you have earth, water, and then you have, the underground. So like falling into the sea is like dying par excellence in a sense. So what Icarus ends up doing is overestimating his own humanity, his own place within the hierarchy, which ends badly for him. So he tries to go towards the light, but he ends up being swallowed up by the dark. Now, the cartoon posits that the Greeks should not have pretended to have more money than they really had. That's what debt is, credit debt, with wealth being this apex, the sun, in the symbolic structure of the picture. And credit cards aren't real wings, as in credit isn't real money. So if you pretend that it is, then the system is going to melt down, if you will. You end up going bankrupt. So it's the idea of flying too high. And you don't need to know what the story is like, of the story of Icarus, that is, to understand what that idiom means. People say stuff like walk tall too. We grasp this intuitively. So that's an example of symbolic thinking. Now you have to notice, again, that you have to switch to a different mode of looking at natural phenomena that are used to create these stories. It's, again, what you might call a more phenomenological lens. You have to you have to think of these different things the way you encounter them in your own personal experience. You know, looking up at the sky and seeing the birds, etc. So that's basically it for the symbols of that story, and you can sort of grasp how the whole flow of that story sort of arises from the way it's being set up. So the symbols are being introduced, arranged, and sequenced in certain ways, and it's a relationship between the symbols that really helps us understand the story. They connect high, low, pride, and death. That's essentially what a very superficial interpretation of that story will do for you. So this is what I've been trying to do with Zelda games, making these connections. Now, how can I be sure that the connections that I see are actually there, actually legit, even when the writers of the story themselves never actually intended them, maybe? Again, in my theory of symbolism, the meaning that arises from a context of symbols is, in a sense, it's inevitable, though the actual meaning is debatable. So here are my criteria for what constitutes an arguable case. It's stable meaning, right? So if you have Link in the beginning, like sitting on a horse, and you could say, well, a horse is, I don't know, fertility symbol, whatever, and the whole game is about fertility, well, that's not going to work, because there's not a whole lot of scenes where Link is actually on the horse, and you'll see that the meaning, I mean, fertility, it falls apart immediately. It hasn't got anything to do with it. So it needs to have a stable meaning, and which also means recurrence. It needs to have a significance in the thematic structure of the story. And then there's the theoretical virtue, simplicity, and efficiency, explanatory powers. So if it gives you insight, it's probably right. But again, the insight needs to be true and stable, and, it needs to be comprehensive. And a part of this is also the moral and psychological and philosophical coherence, as in when you interpret these symbols where you see them, it has to make sense. It has to be a story. That's basically all of these together. In short, it has to be a story. So that's what I mean by symbolic syntax. The symbols have to fit together like a sentence, because a sentence has to fit together if it is to carry communicable meaning. I can't say, yesterday I am going to the grocery store, want to you me come with, or whatever. That doesn't work. It has to make sense. It has to hang together. It has to have these landmarks that pin down the meaning, and then you can build on top of that. So that's essentially it. So yeah, I hope that clears things up a little, and I'll do my best to help you use this frame to sort of think along with me while I do these videos. And so I made a video before where I was trying this new format with the webcam. Doesn't work. I need to write a script, and so the whole webcam thing isn't that great when it's just me reading the script. So yeah, I don't know if I'm going to keep using PowerPoints either. What I might end up doing is just making shorter videos so that the whole editing thing isn't going to space it all out too much and be too tedious and aggravate my injuries and everything. So yeah, I think I'll just do it that way instead, make them shorter, and maybe use PowerPoint. I don't know, it's kind of lame probably. It's okay for this video though. But the script for part 4 is all done, so the video shouldn't take too long to make. I just need to have the courage to actually record the stuff, because that's arguably the most boring part, and editing also is boring. But the script is done, so video should be around soon, and I hope you'll be around to watch it also. And yeah, that's it. I'm signing off. Hope you're having a great week, great weekend. Chill out, play video games, not too much. Maybe read a book. Maybe read Gibson. Maybe read Mathieu Pageau's book, which has just come out. And I'll probably link to some discussions about symbolism in the whatchamacallit, the description little box thing, because I'm just me and there's people who know better, and you can listen to them. That's all cool.